I never thought a simple math problem would destroy my marriage. Last Tuesday evening, I walked into our living room to find my wife Sarah screaming at our 12-year-old son Danny for politely correcting her math mistake while she tutored our 8-year-old daughter Emma. Sarah had been teaching long division incorrectly, and when Danny gently pointed it out, she exploded. "Shut up and mind your own business," she yelled at him, her face red with fury. I immediately intervened, asking Sarah to apologize to our son, but she refused and stormed toward the stairs. When I told her I would lose respect for her if she couldn't own her mistake, Sarah packed a bag left for her sister's house and refused to speak to either Danny or me for 3 days straight. The silence that followed felt like ice creeping through our house. I need to explain our family situation so you understand how devastating this became. Sarah works as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized advertising firm downtown while I repair cars as an automotive technician at Johnson's Auto Shop. We've been married for 9 years together since college and built what I thought was a solid life in our suburban neighborhood outside Detroit. But Sarah's pride has always been her Achilles heel. Growing up with a controlling mother who never admitted fault taught Sarah that apologizing meant weakness. Her mother Dorothy ruled their household with an iron fist, constantly criticizing Sarah's father until he became a shell of a man who rarely spoke above a whisper. Sarah swore she'd never be like her mother, yet here we were. The silent treatment stretched into a full week. Every morning I'd wake up hoping to hear Sarah's key in the door, her voice calling out that she was sorry and ready to come home. Instead, I found myself scrambling to get Danny and Emma ready for school, while trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Danny started asking if he caused Mommy to leave his young shoulders carrying guilt that belonged to adults. Emma cried herself to sleep each night, clutching the stuffed rabbit Sarah had given her last Christmas. I called Sarah repeatedly, but my calls went straight to voicemail. Text messages remained unread. When I tried reaching out through social media, I discovered she had blocked me completely. The woman who once shared every detail of her day with me had erased me from her digital existence as thoroughly as she'd removed herself from our physical home. Then, her sister Monica called, her voice tight with frustration. "Sarah feels attacked and ganged up on," Monica explained. "She thinks you humiliated her in front of the children by taking their side against her." I tried explaining that asking someone to apologize for yelling at a child wasn't taking sides, but Monica had already absorbed Sarah's version of events like a sponge soaking up spilled milk. The real punch to the gut came when I started hearing from friends and extended family members. Sarah had been busy crafting a narrative that painted me as the villain. According to her story, I had humiliated her in front of the children, undermined her authority as a parent, and all ganged up on her with the kids. The truth about Danny's gentle correction and her explosive reaction had been twisted beyond recognition. My mother-in-law Dorothy called on Friday evening, her voice dripping with the same venom she'd used to poison Sarah's childhood. "How dare you embarrass my daughter like that?" she hissed through the phone. "A real man supports his wife, not tears her down in front of the children. You need to apologize to Sarah immediately and beg her forgiveness. You stop." I sat in my kitchen holding the phone while Dorothy's words cut through me like broken glass. Everything I'd tried to teach my children about accountability, about owning mistakes and treating others with respect, was being labeled as betrayal by the people who should have understood the importance of these values. That's when I decided to check our joint bank account, something I hadn't thought to do during the emotional chaos of the past week. My hands shook as I logged into our online banking, and what I found there made my blood turn cold. Sarah had withdrawn $3,000 from our savings account just 2 days after leaving, but that wasn't the worst part. She had opened a separate checking account at a different bank and transferred her direct deposit away from our joint account. This wasn't just a silent treatment or a temporary retreat to her sister's house. Sarah was preparing to leave permanently, and she was taking our financial security with her. 2 weeks after the math incident that started this nightmare, I found a certified letter waiting on my doorstep. My hands trembled as I signed for it, somehow knowing that whatever was inside would change everything. The return address belonged to Harrison Mitchell and Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of, but whose letterhead screamed expensive legal trouble. The letter felt heavier than paper should as I carried it inside. Danny was at soccer practice, and Emma was having a play date at her friend Katie's house, so I had the kitchen to myself when I tore open the envelope. What I read inside made my legs give out, forcing me to grab the counter for support. Sarah had consulted a divorce attorney. The letter, signed by someone named Patricia Harrison Esquire, demanded that I vacate our family home within 30 days. According to the legal document, I had created a hostile environment and systematically undermined her authority as a parent. The language was cold and clinical, describing the man I thought I was as someone dangerous and manipulative. The house belonged to Sarah, purchased with money from her grandmother's estate before we married. I'd spent 9 years treating it as our home painting rooms, fixing the leaky basement, building a treehouse for the kids in the backyard oak tree. Now it was being wielded against me like a weapon, transformed from a sanctuary into a legal fortress I had no right to enter. I called my buddy Jake from high school, who'd become a family lawyer after his own messy divorce. "You need representation immediately," Jake told me, his voice grim. "Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And don't leave that house until you absolutely have to." He recommended James Crawford, a family attorney with 20 years of experience navigating the treacherous waters of custody battles. Crawford's office felt like a funeral parlor, all dark wood and serious faces. The man himself was shorter than I'd expected, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too many families destroy themselves. He read Sarah's attorney's letter with the detached professionalism of a surgeon examining a tumor. "Here's the reality," Crawford said, setting the letter down and looking directly at me. "Your wife owns the house, has a stable employment history, and has made the first move legally. Even though you're clearly an excellent father, she could potentially get primary custody. Courts often favor the parent who can provide housing stability, and right now, that's not you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought about Danny's gap-toothed grin when I helped him with his science projects, about Emma's giggles when we built pillow forts on rainy Saturdays. The idea of seeing them only on alternating weekends felt like contemplating life without oxygen. "What are my options?" I managed to ask. "We fight," Crawford said simply. "We document everything we gather evidence, and we show the court that you're the primary caretaker, despite not owning the property. But I won't lie to you, Bruno. This is going to be expensive, emotionally brutal, and there are no guarantees." That night, after Emma's friend's mother dropped her off, I tried to maintain our normal bedtime routine. But as I read "Good Night, Moon," for what felt like the 1,000th time, Emma's small hand touched my cheek. "Daddy, are you sad because Mommy doesn't live here anymore? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her mother would rather destroy the family than admit she made a mistake? How do you tell a child that grown-ups sometimes choose pride over love?" Sometimes adults have disagreements that take time to work out. I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "But you're not going away too, are you?" she asked, her brown eyes wide with the kind of fear that should never live in a child's heart. I wanted to promise her I'd always be there, that nothing would ever separate us, that our family would heal and return to normal. Instead, I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I love you, more than all the stars in the sky," because it was the only truth I could guarantee. Later that evening, Danny crept into the living room where I sat staring at legal documents. At 12, he was old enough to sense the gravity of our situation, even if he didn't understand all the details. "Dad, did I mess everything up when I corrected Mom's math?" he asked, his voice small and fragile. "No, son. You did exactly what you should have done. Standing up for what's right is never wrong, even when it makes other people uncomfortable." But as I watched him disappear back up the stairs, I wondered if I was lying to him and myself. Had my insistence on accountability really been worth this destruction? Should I have just let the math mistake slide, preserved the peace, and dealt with Sarah's pride more carefully? The answer came the next morning when Emma's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called during my lunch break at the auto shop. Her voice carried a confusion that immediately put me on alert. "Mr. Thompson, I'm calling because we've received some concerning communication from your wife regarding pickup procedures for Emma." My sandwich turned to cardboard in my mouth. "What kind of communication?" "Mrs. Thompson has contacted our office requesting that Emma and Danny not be released to you without her explicit written permission. She's claimed that you've become emotionally unstable and might pose a risk to the children." The world tilted sideways. Sarah had escalated beyond financial manipulation and legal threats. She was actively trying to separate me from my children using lies and fear tactics. The woman who used to brag to her friends about what a devoted father I was had transformed me into a dangerous stranger in the eyes of my children's school. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been the primary pickup parent for both kids for the past 3 years. Has Emma ever seemed afraid of me or mentioned anything concerning about our home life?" "Of course not," she said quickly. "Emma always lights up when she sees you. That's why this request seemed so unusual. We wanted to verify the situation before making any changes to our procedures." I thanked Mrs. Patterson and hung up my hands, shaking with a combination of rage and heartbreak. Sarah wasn't just leaving me. She was systematically destroying my relationship with my children and my reputation in our community. The gentle woman I'd fallen in love with had become someone I didn't recognize, someone willing to weaponize our children's welfare to win a battle I'd never agreed to fight. The sheriff's deputy arrived at Johnson's auto shop on a Thursday afternoon while I was replacing brake pads on Mrs. Chen's Honda Civic. My co-workers gathered around as the uniformed officer asked for Bruno Thompson, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Nothing good ever comes from being served legal papers at your workplace, especially when your hands are covered in grease and your boss is watching from across the garage. "Are you Bruno Thompson?" the deputy asked, his voice professionally neutral. "Yes, sir." He handed me a manila envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "You're being served with a temporary restraining order. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from the residence listed in the order. After that time, you're prohibited from entering the property or contacting the petitioner." The words echoed around the garage bay like gunshots. My supervisor, Rick Torres, stepped forward with a concerned expression that told me this was exactly the kind of drama that could cost a man his job. Rick had always been fair with me, but auto shops depend on reputation and reliability. Employees with restraining orders and legal problems were bad for business. I waited until my shift ended before opening the envelope in my truck. Sarah's sworn statement painted me as a monster I didn't recognize. According to her testimony, I had intimidated and threatened her during the math tutoring incident. She claimed I had raised my voice aggressively and created a climate of fear in our home. The document described someone who used his physical presence to control and manipulate family members. Reading those lies felt like being stabbed repeatedly with a rusty knife. The woman who knew me better than anyone else in the world had twisted our private moment into evidence of domestic intimidation. She'd taken my calm request for an apology and transformed it into psychological abuse. The restraining order was comprehensive and devastating. I couldn't contact Sarah directly or indirectly. I couldn't go within 500 feet of our house. I couldn't communicate with her through friends, family members, or social media. Most crushing of all, I could only see Danny and Emma during supervised visits at the family court facility on Maple Street. I drove to a motel 6 miles from our neighborhood, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions about why a grown man was living alone with a duffel bag and a broken heart. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and cigarettes with thin walls that let me hear every argument television program and crying baby in the adjacent units. My first supervised visit was scheduled for the following Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. The family court building felt like a prison, all concrete and security cameras with metal detectors and guards who looked at every parent like a potential threat. The waiting room was filled with other broken families, fathers clutching gifts for children they could only see under court supervision, mothers with hollow eyes and defensive postures, social workers with clipboards and professional expressions that revealed nothing. Patricia Hill was the social worker assigned to monitor my visits with Danny and Emma. She was a stern woman in her 50s with short gray hair and glasses that reflected light like tiny shields. Her job was to observe every interaction between me and my children, documenting anything that might suggest inappropriate behavior or emotional manipulation. The visitation room looked like a doctor's waiting area, decorated by someone who'd never spent time with actual children. There were educational toys that had seen better decades, books with pages missing and chairs designed for adult comfort rather than family interaction. Everything felt artificial and supervised, like trying to have a genuine conversation while standing on a stage. When Danny and Emma walked through the door, my heart shattered into a million pieces. Emma ran toward me with her arms outstretched, then stopped suddenly when Patricia Hill cleared her throat and reminded her to keep interactions calm and appropriate. Danny hung back near the door, his 12-year-old eyes already showing signs of the adult wariness that comes from watching your family disintegrate. "Why can't we go home with you, Daddy?" Emma asked, her small voice echoing in the sterile room. "The lady at the front desk said we have to stay here with the nice woman who writes things down. How do you explain a restraining order to an 8-year-old? How do you tell your children that their mother has convinced a judge you're dangerous without poisoning them against her?" I spent 2 hours trying to maintain normalcy while Patricia Hill documented every hug, every conversation, every moment of laughter or sadness. Danny was quieter than usual, answering my questions with single words and avoiding eye contact. When I asked about school, his soccer team, or his friends, he responded with the mechanical politeness of a child who'd been coached on appropriate responses. "Are you okay, buddy?" I asked during a moment when Emma was distracted with a puzzle. He glanced toward Patricia Hill, then back at me. "Mom says we shouldn't talk about home stuff when we're here." The words cut deeper than Sarah's restraining order ever could. She was coaching our children, teaching them to keep secrets, training them to see our supervised visits as something dangerous that required careful navigation. The woman who'd once insisted that we raise our kids with honesty and open communication was now turning them into tiny diplomats walking on eggshells. When visiting time ended, Emma clung to me like a drowning person, grabbing a life preserver. "I don't want to go back to Aunt Monica's house," she sobbed. "I want to come home with you." Patricia Hill had to physically separate us, her professional demeanor softening slightly as she witnessed a father being torn away from his heartbroken daughter. As the social worker led my children back to Sarah's sister, Emma's cries echoed down the hallway like an accusation against everyone who'd allowed this situation to develop. I returned to my motel room and called James Crawford, my attorney. His secretary informed me that he was in court, but would return my call that evening. I spent the afternoon staring at water stains on the ceiling, wondering how my life had spiraled so completely out of control. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a husband and father living in suburban comfort. Now, I was a man in a motel room, prohibited from entering my own home, seeing my children under the watchful eye of a court-appointed guardian. Rick Torres called that evening, his voice careful and measured. "Bruno, I need to ask you directly. Are these allegations true?" "Absolutely not," I said, my voice hoarse from holding back tears. I never threatened Sarah or created any kind of hostile environment. I asked her to apologize to our son for yelling at him. That's it. "I believe you," Rick said, "but I have to think about the business. We work in people's homes, we interact with customers' families. If this gets out, if people start talking—" "I understand," I said, though understanding and accepting were two different things. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything yet. But you need to resolve this situation quickly. I can't have employees with active restraining orders representing the shop." After Rick hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my motel room and wondered how much more I could lose. My home was gone. My children were being turned against me. My job was hanging by a thread. And somewhere across town, Sarah was living in her sister's guest room, probably convinced that she was the victim in this entire mess. Then something happened that changed everything. During my second supervised visit the following week, Emma was playing with a toy kitchen set when she looked up at me with her innocent brown eyes and said something that made my blood turn cold. Daddy Mommy practices crying in the bathroom every morning before she talks to her lawyer lady, and Mommy's friend Rachel taught me what to say to the nice lady who asks questions about you. Patricia Hill's pen stopped moving across her notepad. Emma had just revealed that Sarah was coaching her testimony and potentially fabricating her emotional distress for legal purposes. My 8-year-old daughter had inadvertently exposed the manipulation and lies that were destroying our family. I looked at Patricia Hill, who was staring at Emma with the sharp attention of someone who'd just witnessed something significant. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope that the truth might actually matter in a courtroom. James Crawford's recommendation to hire a private investigator felt like admitting defeat and grasping for salvation simultaneously. The man he suggested, Marcus Thompson, operated out of a small office above a sandwich shop on the east side of town. Despite sharing my last name, we weren't related, though. Marcus joked that we were probably brothers in misfortune by the time most people found their way to his door. Marcus was a former police detective who'd left the force after 20 years to help people navigate the murkier waters of civil investigations. He was built like a retired linebacker with graying temples and eyes that missed nothing. His office was cramped but organized, filled with filing cabinets and computer equipment that looked more sophisticated than anything I'd seen outside of television crime shows. Family court cases are about documentation and evidence, Marcus explained during our first meeting. Your wife's attorney is building a narrative. We need to build a better one. The retainer fee was $3,000, money I didn't have, but somehow had to find. I borrowed against my truck, cleaned out what remained of my savings account, and asked my parents for help. My mother Linda cried when I explained the situation. My father George was furious at Sarah, but wrote a check without question. That girl has lost her mind, my mother said, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Sarah used to call you the best father she'd ever seen. Now she's trying to take your children away. My parents had always liked Sarah, welcomed her into our family with open arms, and treated her like the daughter they'd never had. They'd babysat Danny and Emma countless times, attended every school play and soccer game, and considered themselves blessed with wonderful grandchildren. Sarah's transformation from loving daughter-in-law to legal adversary left them confused and heartbroken. Marcus began his investigation immediately, starting with Sarah's social media accounts, employment records, and financial transactions. Within a week, he'd uncovered something that knocked the wind out of me: hotel receipts and credit card statements, showing that Sarah had been meeting someone regularly for the past 6 months. Your wife has been having an affair, Marcus said, sliding a manila folder across his desk. Her lover is Derek Williams, her supervisor at the advertising agency. They've been meeting at the Riverside Inn every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, supposedly for client meetings that don't appear on any company calendar. The photographs were clinical and devastating. Sarah entering the hotel with a man I'd never met, leaving 2 hours later looking disheveled and satisfied. Credit card statements showed expensive dinners, jewelry purchases, and hotel room charges that coincided with days Sarah had claimed to be working late. Derek Williams was 42 years old, married with 2 teenage children, and living in a house worth 3 times what Sarah and I could ever afford. According to Marcus's research, Derek had a history of inappropriate relationships with female employees but had never been officially disciplined due to his value as a client manager. The timeline is interesting, Marcus continued. The affair started roughly 6 months ago, right around the time your wife began creating that separate bank account. This wasn't a recent development, Bruno. She's been planning an exit strategy for half a year. The math tutoring incident hadn't destroyed my marriage. It had simply provided Sarah with a convenient excuse to end something she'd already decided to abandon. My insistence that she apologize to Danny had given her the perfect victim narrative, transforming her from an adulterous wife into a woman fleeing domestic intimidation. There's more, Marcus said, pulling out another set of documents. Derek Williams has been using his corporate credit card to pay for hotel rooms and gifts. I have documentation showing embezzlement of company funds to support his affair with your wife." The evidence was overwhelming and sickening. While I'd been working overtime to afford Emma's ballet lessons and Danny's soccer equipment, my wife had been enjoying expensive lunches and hotel afternoons funded by stolen money. The woman who used to lecture our children about honesty and integrity had been living a double life built on lies and theft. Marcus also discovered that Derek was married to a woman named Jennifer Williams, a high school teacher who had no idea about her husband's extramarital activities. Their children attended private schools that Derek could afford through his legitimate salary and creative accounting with company funds. During this investigation, my life continued its downward spiral. Supervised visits with Danny and Emma became increasingly painful as I watched them adapt to their new reality with the resilience that children shouldn't need to develop. Danny had stopped asking when he could come home with me, accepting our court-monitored meetings as the new normal. Emma still cried when our visits ended, but her tears had become routine rather than urgent. The motel where I was living felt like a prison sentence with cable television. My neighbor in room 12 was a man named Frank who'd lost his family to gambling addiction. The woman in room 14 was escaping an abusive marriage with 2 young sons who attended school irregularly. We were a community of broken people, survivors of various disasters who nodded politely in the parking lot but rarely spoke about our circumstances. My friend from work, Tony Martinez, became my lifeline during those dark weeks. Tony was married to a wonderful woman named Carmen who treated me like a brother, bringing me home-cooked meals and refusing to let me isolate myself completely. Their house became my sanctuary on weekends when I wasn't having supervised visits, a place where I could remember what normal family life looked like. "You can't give up," Tony said one evening as we sat on his back porch drinking beer and watching his kids play in the yard. "Danny and Emma need you to fight for them. They need to see that fathers don't just disappear when things get difficult." Tony's words echoed something my own father had told me years earlier. Being a man isn't about avoiding problems. It's about facing them head-on even when you're scared. Rick Torres at the auto shop was growing increasingly nervous about my legal situation. While he hadn't fired me outright, my hours had been reduced and I was no longer assigned to jobs that involved going to customers' homes. The restraining order made me a liability in a business that depended on trust and community reputation. Marcus Thompson called me on a Wednesday evening with news that would change everything. His voice carried an excitement that I hadn't heard since this nightmare began. "I've got something big," he said. "Derek Williams' wife doesn't know about the affair, and she's going to be very interested in the evidence we've collected. More importantly, their company's corporate headquarters is going to be extremely interested in the embezzlement documentation." "What are you suggesting?" "We're going to destroy Derek Williams' life the same way he helped destroy yours. And when Sarah realizes that her meal ticket has been canceled, she's going to have to face reality." The plan was simple and brutal. Marcus would contact Derek's wife anonymously, providing her with evidence of the affair and financial misconduct. Simultaneously, we would report Derek's embezzlement to his company's corporate headquarters, armed with credit card statements and hotel receipts that clearly showed misuse of company funds. "What about Sarah?" I asked. "Your wife made her choice when she filed false allegations and tried to separate you from your children. She's about to learn that choices have consequences." For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Justice was finally within reach, and the people who had tried to destroy my family were about to face the consequences of their actions. Sarah and Derek had built their relationship on lies, theft, and betrayal. It was time for their house of cards to collapse. The attack would begin the next morning, and I would finally have the evidence I needed to fight back against the woman who had chosen pride over family and adultery over integrity. James Crawford's office felt different when I arrived with Marcus Thompson's evidence. The attorney who had seemed cautious and pessimistic during our previous meetings now moved with the focused energy of a prosecutor who'd just discovered the smoking gun. The manila folders containing hotel receipts, financial records, and surveillance photographs transformed his cluttered desk into a war room. "This changes everything," Crawford said, reviewing the documentation with professional excitement. False allegations in family court are serious business, but when combined with adultery and coaching children to lie, we have grounds for a complete reversal of fortune. We immediately filed a motion to dismiss the restraining order accompanied by a counter-petition for emergency custody, based on Sarah's perjury, adultery, and manipulation of our children. The legal documents painted Sarah as an unfit parent who had lied to the court system while engaging in an extramarital affair funded by embezzled money. "How quickly can we get a hearing?" I asked. "Emergency motions get priority," Crawford replied. "I'm requesting a hearing within 72 hours based on the severity of the false allegations and potential harm to the children." While Crawford prepared our legal counterattack, Marcus Thompson initiated the other phase of our plan. He contacted Derek Williams' wife Jennifer, anonymously sending her a package containing photographs, credit card statements, and hotel receipts documenting her husband's 6-month affair with my wife. "She deserves to know the truth about her marriage," Marcus explained, "and Derek Williams deserves to face the consequences of his choices." The corporate headquarters of Derek's advertising agency received a separate package containing evidence of embezzlement and misuse of company funds. Marcus had documented every hotel charge, every expensive dinner, and every inappropriate gift that Derek had purchased using company money. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt empowered instead of victimized. My wife and her lover had spent months planning and executing the destruction of my family. Now, it was their turn to experience the devastation that comes from having your life systematically dismantled by people who know your secrets. The court scheduled our emergency hearing for Friday morning at 10 o'clock. Judge Margaret Chen had a reputation for taking perjury seriously and had little patience for parents who use children as weapons in custody disputes. Crawford felt confident that our evidence would result in immediate dismissal of the restraining order and emergency custody arrangements favoring me. Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang with a call that made my heart race. The caller ID showed Jennifer Williams, Derek's wife. "Is this Bruno Thompson?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. "Yes, ma'am. I received some information in the mail about my husband and your wife. I need to know if this is real." "Every piece of evidence in that package is authentic and documented," I told her. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but you deserve to know the truth." Jennifer Williams had been married to Derek for 18 years. They'd built what she thought was a solid life together, raising 2 children and working toward retirement. The discovery of his affair and financial misconduct shattered her world as completely as Sarah's lies had destroyed mine. "He's been coming home late, claiming he was working on important client accounts," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "I found hotel key cards in his wallet last month, but when I asked about them, he said they were from business trips I didn't remember him taking." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and I'm reporting the embezzlement to his company myself. If Derek wants to destroy our family for his affair, he can face the consequences alone." Thursday evening, Derek Williams's world collapsed with the sudden violence of a controlled demolition. Jennifer confronted him with the evidence of his affair, immediately filing for divorce and seeking emergency custody of their children. Simultaneously, his company's corporate headquarters received her formal complaint about embezzlement, triggering an immediate internal investigation. Sarah's phone began ringing that evening as Derek's life unraveled. According to Marcus Thompson's surveillance, Derek had been calling and texting Sarah, frantically trying to manage the crisis that was consuming both of their carefully constructed lies. Marcus had positioned himself across the street from Monica's house where Sarah was staying, and reported seeing Derek's car parked in the driveway for over 3 hours Thursday night. Whatever conversation they were having, it wasn't going well. Derek left just after midnight, his car speeding away like he was fleeing the scene of a crime. Friday morning arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. I put on my best suit, the same one I'd worn to my wedding and Danny's first communion, and drove to the family courthouse with James Crawford. The building that had felt like a prison during supervised visits now felt like a place where justice might actually be served. Sarah arrived with her attorney Patricia Harrison, looking haggard and desperate. She'd lost weight during the past month, and her usually perfect appearance showed signs of stress and sleepless nights. When she saw me across the courtroom, her eyes filled with something that looked like regret, but it was too late for regret to matter. Judge Chen reviewed our motion and supporting evidence with the methodical thoroughness of someone accustomed to separating truth from fiction. The hotel receipts, financial records, and surveillance photographs were entered into evidence, along with my sworn statement detailing Sarah's coaching of our children. "Mrs. Thompson," Judge Chen said, addressing Sarah directly, "you filed a restraining order claiming that your husband threatened and intimidated you. The evidence presented today suggests that your allegations may have been fabricated. How do you respond to these accusations?" Sarah's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, but Sarah herself seemed to have lost the ability to speak. The woman who had confidently lied to obtain a restraining order was now faced with documented proof of her perjury and adultery. "Your Honor," Patricia Harrison said, standing to address the court, "my client maintains that she felt threatened and acted in good faith when seeking protection from the court." Judge Chen's expression made it clear that she wasn't impressed with this response. Good faith doesn't include coaching children to lie during custody evaluations or maintaining extramarital relationships while filing false allegations against a spouse. The hearing continued for 2 hours as Crawford systematically presented our evidence. Derek Williams's embezzlement, the timeline of Sarah's affair, the coach testimony of our children, and the fabricated nature of her domestic violence claims created a picture of calculated deception that even Sarah's experienced attorney couldn't counter. When Judge Chen announced her decision, I felt like a drowning man finally reaching the surface of the water. "The restraining order is dismissed immediately. Mr. Thompson is awarded temporary custody of both children effective today. Mrs. Thompson's visitation will be supervised until further evaluation can be completed." As we left the courthouse, Sarah approached me in the parking lot. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with years earlier, vulnerable and lost rather than angry and manipulative. "Bruno," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I never wanted it to go this far." But before I could respond, her sister Monica came running across the parking lot, her face panicked and urgent. "Sarah, you need to come to the hospital right now," Monica shouted. "Something's happened and it's bad." Sarah collapsed on the asphalt beside her sister's car, and I realized that our story was about to take another unexpected turn that would test everything I thought I knew about justice, mercy, and the price of revenge. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that follows a medical crisis. Sarah sat slumped in a wheelchair beside the nurse's station, her body shaking with tremors that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than fear. Monica paced nearby, clutching her cell phone and speaking in urgent whispers to someone I couldn't identify. I'd followed their car to the hospital despite having every reason to drive straight home to my children. Something about Sarah's collapse in the courthouse parking lot had looked less like defeat and more like genuine medical distress. Whatever was happening went beyond our legal battle or even her affair with Derek Williams. "What's wrong with her?" I asked Monica, setting aside months of anger to focus on immediate human need. "She's been taking pills," Monica said, her voice cracking with exhaustion and worry. "Anxiety medication that her doctor prescribed after her father died last year. But she's been taking more and more of them, especially since Derek started pulling away from her." Sarah's father had passed away 11 months earlier from a sudden heart attack. I remembered the funeral, remembered holding Sarah as she sobbed through the service, remembered thinking that she'd grieved and moved forward. Apparently, I'd been wrong about her recovery, just as I'd been wrong about so many other things. "How many pills?" the emergency room doctor asked Monica, his voice professional but urgent. "I don't know. I found empty bottles in her purse, prescription bottles from 3 different doctors. She's been doctor shopping, getting multiple prescriptions for the same medication." The pieces of Sarah's behavior over the past year suddenly rearranged themselves into a different pattern. Her increasing irritability, her explosive reaction to Danny's innocent correction, her willingness to destroy our family rather than admit a simple mistake. None of it had been about pride or stubbornness. My wife had been drowning in prescription drug addiction, and I'd been too focused on our daily routines to notice. Dr. Martinez, the emergency room physician, pulled me aside after examining Sarah. Your wife is experiencing withdrawal symptoms combined with what appears to be a panic disorder. Her blood work shows elevated levels of benzodiazepines, suggesting long-term abuse of anxiety medication. Is she going to be okay? Physically, yes, with proper treatment. But she's going to need intensive rehabilitation to address the addiction issues. This kind of prescription drug abuse often develops gradually, becoming a serious problem before family members recognize the signs. I thought about all the times over the past year when Sarah had seemed off somehow. Mornings when she moved through our house like she was walking underwater. Evenings when she snapped at the children over minor infractions that previously wouldn't have bothered her. Nights when she lay beside me in bed staring at the ceiling with an expression I couldn't read. The legal stress of your custody battle appears to have triggered a complete breakdown. Dr. Martinez continued. When addicts lose their primary coping mechanism, the psychological crash can be severe. Monica approached us with tears streaming down her cheeks. I should have said something months ago, she whispered. I knew she was taking too many pills, but she kept insisting her doctor said it was okay. After Dad died, she couldn't sleep, couldn't function. The pills were the only thing that made her feel normal. Sarah's father had been her anchor, the one person in her family who'd never criticized or controlled her. His sudden death had left her emotionally adrift, just as Derek Williams entered her life with promises of excitement and escape. The affair hadn't been about not loving me or our children. It had been about running away from grief she couldn't process while under the influence of prescription medications. Where's Derek now? I asked Monica. Gone, she said bitterly. As soon as his wife filed for divorce and his company started investigating the embezzlement, he disappeared. Sarah's been calling him for 2 days, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. She just realized that everything he promised her was lies. Derek Williams had used my wife's vulnerability and addiction to facilitate his own selfish desires. He'd taken advantage of a woman struggling with grief and prescription drug abuse, promising her a future he'd never intended to deliver. When the consequences of their relationship threatened his own stability, he'd abandoned Sarah to face the wreckage alone. The hospital's psychiatric social worker, Dr. Linda Foster, met with Monica and me to discuss Sarah's treatment options. A slender woman with kind eyes and graying hair, Dr. Foster specialized in addiction recovery and family counseling. Prescription drug addiction often develops in people who would never consider themselves drug users, Dr. Foster explained. They're taking medication prescribed by doctors following what they believe to be legitimate medical advice. By the time they realize they're dependent, the addiction has already altered their judgment and behavior. Is this why she filed false allegations against me? I asked. Addiction affects decision-making processes in complex ways. People under the influence of benzodiazepines often experience heightened emotional reactions, paranoid thinking, and impaired judgment. Your wife's response to a simple correction from your son may have felt genuinely threatening to her altered brain chemistry. Dr. Foster recommended a 60-day inpatient rehabilitation program that specialized in prescription drug addiction and trauma counseling. The facility would address both Sarah's substance abuse and the underlying grief that had triggered her self-medication. What about our children? I asked. How do I explain this to Danny and Emma? Addiction is a disease, not a moral failing, Dr. Foster said gently. Children need age-appropriate honesty about their parents' condition, combined with reassurance that addiction doesn't mean their mother stopped loving them. As the evening approached, I sat beside Sarah's hospital bed while she drifted in and out of medicated sleep. Monica had gone home to call other family members, leaving us alone for the first time since the math tutoring incident that had started this nightmare. When Sarah's eyes opened and focused on my face, I saw recognition mixed with shame and exhaustion. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "Because you're the mother of my children," I said simply. "And because you're sick." Sarah's eyes filled with tears that seemed to come from a place deeper than our legal battle, or even her affair with Derek. I messed up everything, didn't I? Yeah, you did, but we can figure out how to fix some of it. Derek won't return my calls, she said, her voice breaking. He told me we'd be together after the divorce, that he'd take care of me and help me start over, but as soon as his wife found out, he just disappeared. Sarah, Derek Williams used you. He took advantage of your grief and your addiction to get what he wanted. When it became inconvenient, he threw you away. She closed her eyes and turned her face toward the window. I filed false allegations against you. I tried to take Danny and Emma away from you. I destroyed our family for a man who never cared about me. You were sick, I said. That doesn't excuse what you did, but it explains it. Do you think Danny and Emma will ever forgive me? The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire that had finally burned itself out. Our children had been casualties in a war they'd never asked to join, victims of their mother's addiction and their father's stubborn insistence on accountability. I think they need to understand that you're sick and getting help, I said. What happens after that depends on the choices you make going forward. Sarah's sister Monica returned to the hospital room just as visiting hours were ending. She carried a small suitcase containing clothes and personal items for Sarah's upcoming transfer to the rehabilitation facility. The admissions coordinator called, Monica told us. They have a bed available starting Monday morning. It's a 60-day program that includes individual counseling, group therapy, and family sessions. Sarah looked at me with an expression that reminded me of our children when they needed reassurance about something frightening. Will you bring Danny and Emma to see me during family therapy sessions? If the counselors think it's appropriate, and if the kids want to come, then yes. And Bruno, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry for all of it. I left the hospital that evening, knowing that our marriage was over, but feeling something like peace for the first time in months. Sarah's addiction and affair had destroyed our relationship beyond repair, but understanding the root causes of her behavior allowed me to separate the disease from the person I'd once loved. The woman who'd screamed at our son and filed false allegations against me wasn't the same woman I'd married. But with proper treatment and honest accountability, she might become someone capable of being a mother to Danny and Emma again. Justice hadn't required destroying Sarah completely. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal is choosing mercy over revenge, especially when children's welfare hangs in the balance. My phone buzzed with a text message from James Crawford as I drove home from the hospital. Emergency custody hearing successful. You can pick up Danny and Emma tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They're waiting for you. For the first time in over a month, I was going home to my children. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our old house, packing the last of my belongings into cardboard boxes labeled Bruno's stuff, in Emma's careful second-grade handwriting. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier with joint custody arrangements that prioritized the children's stability while acknowledging the reality of our permanently broken marriage. Sarah had successfully completed her 60-day rehabilitation program and was living in a modest apartment downtown, working part-time at a nonprofit organization while attending twice-weekly therapy sessions. The criminal charges for filing false allegations had been reduced to community service after she'd admitted her perjury and completed addiction treatment. Her recovery was genuine, but our relationship had sustained damage that couldn't be repaired with sobriety and apologies. Derek Williams had lost everything. His wife Jennifer had divorced him and received primary custody of their children, along with most of their marital assets. The advertising agency had fired him for embezzlement and filed criminal charges that resulted in 18 months in county jail. His affair with my wife had cost him his marriage, his career, his freedom, and his relationship with his children. I felt no satisfaction in Derek's destruction. Watching another man's life implode reminded me that revenge often creates more casualties than justice. Derek's children were innocent victims of his choices, just as Danny and Emma had been innocent victims of their mother's addiction and my stubborn insistence on accountability. The custody arrangement we'd developed through family therapy sessions worked better than I'd expected. Danny and Emma spent weekdays with me and alternating weekends with Sarah, who had proven herself capable of sober parenting under professional supervision. They were resilient kids who'd adapted to their new reality with the flexibility that children possess when adults provide consistent love and stability. Danny had grown 3 inches during the chaos of our family breakdown, transforming from a boy into a young man who asked harder questions and demanded more honest answers. His experience watching our marriage dissolve had taught him that adults make mistakes, that families sometimes break apart, and that standing up for truth can be costly but necessary. "Dad, are you sad about moving out?" he asked, helping me carry boxes to my truck. "I'm sad that our family changed," I said honestly. "But I'm happy that you and Emma are safe, and that your mom is getting better." "Do you think she'll stay better?" It was the question that kept me awake some nights, wondering if Sarah's recovery would last or if addiction would eventually reclaim her. "I think she's working hard to stay healthy," I told him. "But addiction is something she'll have to manage for the rest of her life." Emma had processed the divorce differently, focusing on concrete details like which bedroom she'd sleep in and whether her stuffed animals could travel between houses. At 8 years old, she understood that Mommy had been sick and that medicine had made her act mean, but she didn't grasp the broader implications of adultery and betrayal. "Daddy, will you still read me bedtime stories when you live in the new house?" she asked, sitting cross-legged on her bed while I packed my books. "Every night when you're with me," I promised. "And maybe we can call each other on the nights when you're at Mommy's house." My new house was a 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood 2 miles from the children's school. I'd used the money from selling my half of our marital home to make a substantial down payment, creating a mortgage I could afford on my automotive technician salary. The backyard was smaller than what we'd had, but it included a mature apple tree, perfect for climbing, and a deck where we could barbecue on summer evenings. Tony Martinez and his wife Carmen had helped me move furniture and paint bedrooms during weekends when the kids were with Sarah. Their friendship had sustained me through the darkest months of my life, proving that some relationships can withstand any crisis. "You look better," Carmen observed, surveying my new living room with its mismatched furniture and family photographs. "More relaxed somehow." She was right. The constant tension of living with someone struggling with addiction, even when I hadn't understood what was happening, had disappeared. My new house felt peaceful, in a way our family home never had during Sarah's illness. Sarah's recovery had included family therapy sessions where she'd apologized directly to Danny and Emma for her behavior during the math tutoring incident and throughout the custody battle. The children's therapist, Dr. Susan Walsh, had helped them process their mother's addiction and understand that love can coexist with illness and poor choices. "Addiction doesn't excuse harmful behavior," Dr. Walsh had explained during one of our joint sessions. "But understanding addiction can help families heal from the damage that harmful behavior creates." Sarah's apologies to our children were heartfelt and specific. She acknowledged yelling at Danny inappropriately, explained that her brain had been affected by too much medication, and promised to continue taking care of her health so she could be the mother they deserved. "I made choices that hurt our family," she told them during a supervised visit at the rehabilitation center. "Daddy was right to ask me to apologize, and I was wrong to get angry about it. When people make mistakes, they should own them and try to do better." The words I'd been trying to teach our children through my insistence on accountability had finally come from their mother's mouth. It was too late to save our marriage, but it wasn't too late to model responsibility and growth for Danny and Emma. My relationship with my children had deepened during the months when I'd been their primary caretaker. Emma and I had developed Saturday morning pancake rituals that included elaborate shapes and chocolate chip designs. Danny and I worked on his homework together every evening, and he'd started asking my advice about friendships and school challenges. "You're a good dad," Sarah said during our final family therapy session. "I'm sorry it took losing our marriage for me to realize that." "You're getting to be a good mother again," I replied. "That's what matters now." The most unexpected development in our post-divorce relationship was our ability to co-parent effectively. Sarah's sobriety had restored the woman I'd originally fallen in love with, someone capable of putting our children's needs ahead of her own ego. We communicated about school events, medical appointments, and behavioral concerns with the respectful efficiency of business partners rather than bitter ex-spouses. Rick Torres had not only kept me employed during the legal battle, but had promoted me to shop foreman when our previous supervisor retired. The restraining order crisis had actually demonstrated my character to customers who'd followed the situation, many of whom specifically requested my services after learning the truth about Sarah's false allegations. "People respect a man who stands up for his principles," Rick told me during my performance review. "You could have taken the easy road and avoided all that legal drama, but you chose to fight for your kids instead." The most significant change in my life came through an unexpected connection with Tony Martinez's younger sister, Maria. She'd moved to town to help care for their aging parents and had started joining our weekend gatherings at Tony and Carmen's house. Maria was a nurse practitioner with 2 children from a previous marriage, a woman who understood single parenting and appreciated the complexities of blended families. Our relationship developed slowly, built on friendship and shared experiences rather than romantic urgency. Danny and Emma adored her, and her children Sophia and Miguel welcomed me into their lives with the openness that comes from having watched their mother rebuild after divorce. "Are you going to marry Maria?" Emma asked one evening as we prepared dinner together. "Maybe someday," I said. "How would you feel about that?" "I think it would be nice," Emma replied thoughtfully. "She makes really good cookies and she doesn't yell when we make mistakes." Maria's presence in our lives provided stability and joy without creating competition with Sarah's role as the children's mother. She understood that successful blended families require respect for biological parents and patience with complicated emotions. Sarah had met Maria during a school event and approached her afterward with characteristic directness. "Thank you for being good to my children," Sarah said simply. "They're wonderful kids," Maria replied. "You and Bruno raised them well." It was a moment of grace that demonstrated how much Sarah had grown during her recovery. The woman who'd once been threatened by Danny's gentle correction was now capable of gratitude toward another woman who loved her children. As I loaded the final box into my truck, preparing to leave our family home for the last time, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. A simple disagreement about long division had revealed deep fractures in our marriage, but it had also forced all of us to confront truth and choose growth over comfort. Danny and Emma had learned that families can survive crisis, that adults can make serious mistakes and still deserve love, and that standing up for what's right sometimes requires courage. Sarah had learned that addiction destroys judgment, that accountability is a sign of strength rather than weakness, and that recovery is possible with honest effort and professional help. I'd learned that love alone isn't enough to sustain a marriage, that sometimes protecting your children requires fighting their other parent, and that justice is most powerful when tempered with mercy. Our family looked different now, spread across 2 households and held together by scheduled visitation rather than shared daily routines. But we were healthier than we'd been in years, built on foundations of honesty and accountability that could support whatever challenges lay ahead. Standing in my new driveway, I looked back at the house where my children had learned to walk and talk, where Sarah and I had shared 9 years of marriage, where our family had been born and ultimately transformed. The building would house new families, new dreams, and probably new crises that would test other parents' ability to choose principles over peace. My phone buzzed with a text message from Emma, who was spending the weekend with her mother. "Daddy, I can't wait to see your new house tomorrow. Mom says she's proud of you for making a good home for us." Sarah's text message followed a few minutes later. "Thank you for fighting for our children, even when it meant fighting me. I hope someday I can be the person you thought you married." As I drove toward my new life, I thought about the questions that every parent faces. How do you teach children to stand up for truth when truth creates conflict? How do you model integrity when integrity costs relationships? How do you balance justice with mercy when the people you love have hurt you deeply? The answers aren't found in textbooks or parenting guides. They're discovered through trial and error, through making difficult choices and living with their consequences, through choosing long-term character over short-term comfort. Tonight I would read bedtime stories to my children in their new bedrooms, tuck them into bed surrounded by familiar belongings in an unfamiliar house. Tomorrow we would begin another week of shared custody, homework, help, soccer practice, and ballet lessons. Our family calendar looked different, but our family values remained constant. Sometimes the right choice leads through temporary darkness, but integrity and perseverance always illuminate the path to genuine happiness and healing. I want to ask you something. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right seemed like it might cost you everything you loved? How did you handle the choice between keeping peace and demanding accountability? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for following our family's journey through crisis and recovery. I hope our story reminds you that broken families can heal, that addiction doesn't have to win, and that children are more resilient than we sometimes believe when adults provide honest love and consistent boundaries. If you found value in this story, please consider liking this video to help others find it, subscribing to hear more real-life experiences, and sharing it with anyone who might benefit from knowing that families can survive even the most devastating betrayals when people choose growth over grudges. Until next time, remember that the most important lessons our children learn come not from what we say, but from what we do when life tests our principles.